You are tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. You know that kind. It is straightforward, honest, the clean fatigue of a body that has worked and needs rest. This is different. This is the kind of tired that is still there in the morning, after a full night, before the day has made any demands at all. The kind that sits behind your eyes like something heavy that does not belong there. The kind that has been building for so long you have stopped tracking when it began. You know this tiredness, and you have probably for a long time been doing what most people do with it. You have been managing it, telling yourself it will ease when things are less busy, telling yourself it is just a phase, just the season, just the particular combination of circumstances that will eventually shift. You have been functioning, which is its own considerable achievement, and you have been doing it with a competence that most people around you probably admire, because the particular tiredness you are carrying does not show in your performance. It shows in the quality of your presence when no one is watching, in the 3 a.m. thoughts, in the way joy has become lately a thing you can recognize but not quite reach. If any of that is true for you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in those words, then this story is for you. Close your eyes if you can, or soften your gaze, letting the world in front of you become unfocused, present but not demanding. Let your jaw release. Let your shoulders drop. Let the breath come in on its own. You do not need to control it. Just notice it, the way you would notice a gentle sound in the background of a quiet room. In and out. In and out. You do not have to solve anything in the next hour. You do not have to arrive anywhere. You do not have to become anyone other than the person who is already here, already breathing, already more than sufficient for this moment, even if you have not believed that for a very long time. The Buddha said something that tends to be mistranslated, or at least undertranslated, in a way that does a disservice to the depth of what he meant. He is often quoted as saying, "Life is suffering," which is true in a technical sense, but which misses the precision of the original teaching entirely. What he actually pointed to was dukkha, a Pali word that has no direct English equivalent, but that is better understood as unsatisfactoriness. The quality of experience that arises when we are trying to hold on to things that cannot be held, when we are trying to be something other than what we are, when we are working very hard to maintain an image of ourselves, to ourselves and to others, that does not quite match what is actually happening inside. The exhaustion you feel, if you feel it, is very often the exhaustion of dukkha, not the suffering of dramatic events or visible catastrophes. Most people who know this tiredness do not have dramatic lives in that sense. It is the quieter, more persistent suffering of the gap between who you are presenting to the world and who you actually are when the performance is over. Between the version of yourself that manages and functions and gets things done, and the version that lies awake at 3 a.m, wondering when things started feeling like this and whether they will ever feel different. This is a story about a man named Stephen who had been living in that gap for 11 years. He was 54, a general practitioner, a family doctor in a busy city practice, a man who spent his days listening carefully to other people's pain and helping them make sense of it and find a way forward, and who had, for 11 years, been completely unable to apply any of that skill to his own interior life. Not because he lacked the knowledge. He had more than enough knowledge. He was, in fact, the kind of person who understood other people's suffering with unusual precision, and who could not, for a very long time, see his own. He had been a doctor for 26 years. He had entered medicine with genuine idealism, the kind that is specific to people in their mid-20s who have decided to give their professional life to something larger than personal advancement. He had believed in the work. He had been good at it, and the goodness had been its own reward for a long time. The specific satisfaction of being useful, of being the person someone called when they were frightened and did not know what was wrong and needed someone to help them find out. What happened to that satisfaction is a story that many people in the helping professions know from the inside, without quite having the words for it. It did not disappear suddenly. It eroded, gradually, under the accumulated weight of a system that had been asking more than it could reasonably give for longer than anyone wanted to admit. The appointments that ran over because the problems were too complex for the allotted time. The paperwork that ate the hours he should have been resting. The patients whose needs were real and whose circumstances were difficult and who needed more than any single appointment could contain. The sense, growing steadily over a decade, that he was running to stand still, that the gap between what was needed and what was possible was widening rather than closing, and that his own well-being was the thing most easily sacrificed to bridge it. He told no one. This is the other part of the story that people in the helping professions know very well. The difficulty of being the one who is supposed to know about these things and needing help with them. The particular irony of spending your days saying to patients that it is all right to ask for help and finding when it is your own turn that the asking is impossibly difficult. He was the doctor. He was the one who understood. He was not supposed to be the person sitting across the desk. And so he managed. He got up each morning and drove to the practice and saw his patients and listened carefully and prescribed and referred and followed up and did everything that was required of him with a thoroughness that his colleagues respected and his patients trusted. And he went home in the evenings and ate dinner and watched an hour of television and went to bed and lay in the dark and was, in the quietest and most private version of himself, profoundly and increasingly alone with something he had no idea how to address. His wife, Patricia, who had been with him for 27 years and who knew him in the way that only people who have spent that much time together know each other, not always the surface, but the weather beneath it, had been watching the erosion for several years. She was a careful woman, not given to confrontation, but she was also perceptive and patient, and she had been waiting for the right moment with the particular strategic patience of someone who understands that the right moment cannot be forced. She chose a Sunday morning in October, when the garden outside was doing its autumn business and the house was quiet, and Stephen was on his second cup of coffee in a posture that she had learned to recognize, the posture of a man who is present in body and somewhere else entirely, in everything else. She sat across from him. She did not ask how he was doing because she already knew how he said he was doing, and that answer had ceased to interest her. She asked instead, "What do you actually need right now?" Not, "What do you have to do this week?" Not, "What is the next obligation?" What do you need? He looked at her. He looked at his coffee. He was quiet for a long time. And then, unexpectedly, his eyes filled with tears that he did not let fall, which was its own kind of answer. What followed was not quick. Nothing of this kind is quick. But it began in that kitchen in October with an honest answer to an honest question, or at least with the first crack in the surface of the management, the first admission that there was something underneath that needed attending to. A colleague, cautiously and with the tact of someone who had been waiting for an opening, mentioned a physician wellness program that included, among other things, a week-long retreat with a meditation component. Stephen's first reaction was resistance. He had the intellectual's characteristic wariness of anything that might edge into the territory of self-help, the slightly raised eyebrow of someone who spent his professional life with evidence-based practice and was not sure what category to put this in. But Patricia, who had heard the resistance before, simply said, "You have tried everything else in your usual toolkit. Maybe try something different." He went. The retreat was held at a converted farmhouse in a rural setting, deliberately unremarkable, the kind of place that offers no particular distraction from whatever you have brought with you. There were 14 physicians, all at different points in the same general spectrum of depletion. The meditation teacher was a man named Oliver, in his 60s, a former surgeon who had practiced meditation for 30 years, who had the specific quality of presence that comes from someone who has been through the kind of difficulty he is teaching about and has found his way to the other side of it, not through bypassing it, but through going directly through. Oliver began the first session without preamble. He sat in front of the group and said, "I am going to make an assumption. I am going to assume that most of you in this room are very good at caring for other people and genuinely poor at caring for yourselves. And I am going to further assume that this is not a character flaw, but a training issue. That you were trained, explicitly and implicitly, over many years, to put your own needs last, and that you have been doing so with such consistency that you have stopped noticing it. Please tell me if that assumption is wrong." Nobody told him it was wrong. He said the Buddhist teaching I want to offer you this week begins not with a technique or a practice, but with a permission. Permission to notice what is actually happening inside you. Permission to stop performing wellness at yourself as vigorously as you perform it for your patients. Permission to be exactly as depleted as you actually are, without managing that depletion into a more presentable shape. Permission, simply, to be honest with yourself about what you are carrying. He said in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, the first step of any practice is called samaditthi, right view. And right view does not mean correct opinion or orthodox belief. It means seeing clearly, seeing what is actually there. The Buddha's foundational teaching, the first noble truth, is not that life is suffering in the sense of a pessimistic verdict about existence. It is an invitation to look clearly at the experience of unsatisfactoriness that runs through most human lives, to acknowledge it honestly, rather than managing it or suppressing it or explaining it away, and to understand that this acknowledgement, this clear seeing, is not the problem. It is the beginning of the solution. Stephen listened to this with the particular attention of someone who is hearing something their whole system has been waiting for, without knowing what it was waiting for. He had been, for 11 years, explaining his own experience away, reframing it in the medical language he was most comfortable with: stress, burnout, compassion fatigue, as though the naming of it was the same as understanding it, and as though understanding it was the same as addressing it. He had been applying to his own suffering the same efficient evidence-based approach he used for complex cases in the practice, and he had been getting the same result he would have gotten if he had treated a patient's grief with clinical analysis rather than genuine presence. The problem was not that he did not understand what was happening. The problem was that understanding was not the same as being with it, and being with it was what the practice was asking for. The first sitting meditation that Oliver led was simple to the point of austerity. Sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Notice the breath. When the mind wanders, and it will wander, notice that it has wandered. Note what it wandered to, and return to the breath. That is the entire instruction. Return to the breath. Stephen sat and found his mind wandering within approximately 4 seconds. It went to the patient list for Tuesday. It went to a referral he needed to chase. It went to a conversation with a colleague that had not resolved cleanly. It went to the pile of admin on his desk that he had been avoiding. It went, very briefly, to Patricia's face in the kitchen in October, and then away again before he could stay with it. He returned to the breath. He wandered again. He returned again. This continued for 25 minutes, which felt considerably longer. At the end, Oliver said, "You did the practice." Some of you probably feel like you failed the practice because your mind was never still. I want to be very precise about this. The practice is not the stillness. The practice is the returning. Every time you noticed the wandering and chose to come back, that was the practice. That was not failure. That was exactly what you were here to do. Something in Stephen released at this. He could not have said exactly what, some knot of performance anxiety that he had not known he was bringing to the sitting cushion, some expectation of himself that had been present even here, even in this, even in the one place where no one needed anything from him. The releasing of that expectation was itself a small but genuine relief. Over the days that followed, the practice deepened in the way that Vipassana practice deepens when it is genuinely engaged. Not dramatically, not with the quality of revelation, but with the incremental, almost tedious quality of a fog slowly lifting. Stephen began to see the contents of his own mind with more clarity than he had had in years. Not new contents, the same material that had always been there, the same exhaustion, the same sense of deficit, the same 3 a.m. thoughts, but seen now rather than simply inhabited, observed rather than identified with, present in his awareness as objects of attention rather than as the air he was breathing. On the 4th day, Oliver introduced a teaching from the Majjhima Nikaya, the collection of middle-length discourses, one of the oldest records of the Buddha's teaching, about the difference between primary and secondary experience. The primary experience, Oliver explained, is what actually happens. The sensation, the emotion, the thought, the event. The secondary experience is the story we build around it. The interpretation, the evaluation, the narrative of what it means about us and about the world. In most people's lives, the secondary experience is so fast and so automatic that it is indistinguishable from the primary. We do not experience pain and then separately construct a story about the pain. The pain and the story arrive together, already merged, and the story is already producing its effects. The further suffering, the resistance, the compulsive analysis, before we have even registered what the original experience was. The practice of Vipassana, Oliver said, is in part the practice of slowing this process down enough to see the two things separately. To feel the tiredness as tiredness before the story about the tiredness arrives. To feel the grief as grief before the evaluation of whether you are allowed to be grieving, whether it is proportionate, whether other people have it worse. To feel the loneliness as loneliness before the argument about whether someone in your position with your life has any right to feel lonely. Stephen heard this and felt something shift in his chest. The same kind of physical recognition he had experienced when Oliver had said, "Right view is seeing clearly." He had been for 11 years living almost entirely in the secondary experience. Almost everything he felt had been processed through the story before he had a chance to simply feel it. The story said, "You are a doctor. You understand suffering. You have more resources than most of your patients. You do not have the right to be this depleted." The story said, "Other people are managing. Why can you not manage?" The story said, "You chose this. You knew what you were getting into. This is not something you are allowed to struggle with." The story was so loud and so well rehearsed and so apparently reasonable that the actual experience, the actual tiredness, the actual loneliness, the actual grief of the 11 years had never quite been allowed to land. Oliver, on the 5th evening, said something that Stephen wrote down and kept: "The healing is not on the other side of the understanding. The healing is in the feeling." In allowing the primary experience to be fully felt, not analyzed, not managed, not reframed into a more acceptable shape, simply felt, with the full quality of attention that you bring to your most important work, you are experts at being present for other people's pain. This week, the invitation is to be present for your own. That night, in his small room at the farmhouse, Stephen sat on the floor for an hour and did what he had not done in 11 years. He let himself feel what was actually there. Not all of it. These things do not work in single sessions, however intensive, but enough. Enough to know what it actually was underneath the management. Enough to understand that it was not, as the story had always insisted, a sign of weakness or inadequacy or insufficient resilience. It was simply the natural response of a human being who had been giving a very great deal for a very long time, without giving enough back to himself. He cried, which surprised him. He had not cried in a long time. The management had been very efficient about that. The crying was, like Margaret's in the previous story, quiet and thorough, and when it was over, something had shifted. Not resolved. Nothing is resolved in a single sitting. But the quality of the air in the room felt different. The weight in his chest had not disappeared, but had become, somehow, less opaque. Something that had been pressed down without space to breathe had been given a little room. He called Patricia the next morning, the one permitted call of the retreat. He did not have a great deal to say. The retreat was still ongoing, and the experience was still too close to have words for yet. But he said something she had not heard him say in a long time, which was, "I think I have been very far away. I am sorry. I am working on coming back." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know. I'll be here." The last day of the retreat, Oliver offered a final teaching on what he called the 2 arrows, the same teaching that appeared in an earlier episode of this series, but addressed now to the specific situation of people whose first arrow is the genuine difficulty of work that makes enormous demands, and whose second arrow is the judgment that they should not be struggling with it. He said the first arrow is the depletion. It is real. It is the result of working in a system that asks more than is sustainable, and it would have affected anyone doing what you do, with the care that you do it, for the length of time you have been doing it. You did not cause this by being weak. You did not cause it by failing to take care of yourself early enough. You caused it by being genuinely committed to your patients in a context that made genuine commitment unsustainable. And that is a very different thing. The second arrow, the one you shoot yourself, is the verdict you have attached to the first. The judgment that your depletion is evidence of a flaw. The insistence that you should have managed better, should have protected yourself more effectively, should have known earlier and done something sooner. That verdict is not true. It is not even a reasonable interpretation of the evidence. It is simply an arrow. And you can choose, with practice, to stop shooting it. Stephen drove home on the last day through countryside that he noticed, for the first time in a very long time, with something approaching genuine attention. The quality of the sky, the specific color of the autumn fields, the way the light moved across the hills. Small things, present things, things that were actually there, available to be seen by anyone paying enough attention to see them. He thought about Oliver saying the healing is not on the other side of the understanding. He thought about 11 years of understanding without healing. He thought about the primary experience, the actual tiredness, the actual loneliness, the actual grief. Finally given enough room to simply be what it was, without immediately being processed into something more manageable. He thought about Patricia saying, "I'll be here." He was glad she was. He returned to work the following Monday. The practice did not begin the following Monday. The appointment system did not change. The referral backlog did not shrink. The paperwork was still there in the quantity that it always was. But something had changed in how he sat in the consulting room. Not dramatically visible to patients. He was still careful, still thorough, still the doctor they had come to see. But the quality of his attention was slightly different, less filtered through the secondary experience, more direct, more present with what was actually in front of him. He began to sit in the mornings, 20 minutes before the practice opened, in the small office that was usually given over to administrative catch-up. He was not consistent. The weeks were full and the discipline was difficult to maintain, and there were more days than he would have liked when the 20 minutes evaporated into other things. He returned each time. The only failed practice, Oliver had said, is the one abandoned entirely. His senior colleague, a woman who had been watching him for several years with the quiet concern of someone who cares but has not known how to say so, remarked one morning about 6 months after the retreat that he seemed different. She could not quite say how. He seemed, she said, as though he was more in the room. More in the room. He thought about that. He had spent 11 years in rooms, consulting rooms, meeting rooms, the room of his own mind at 3 a.m, and had been, in a fundamental sense, not quite in any of them. The performance of presence is not the same as presence. You can say the right things and ask the right questions and respond with the appropriate clinical care and still be somewhere else, operating from behind a screen of exhaustion and unacknowledged grief, giving people the form of your attention without the substance of it. He was working toward the substance. Slowly, imperfectly, with more backsliding than forward motion on some weeks, but working toward it, present in the room and in the marriage and in the small moments of the ordinary day that he had been getting through rather than living, with an increasing quality of actual contact. The tiredness was still there, some of it structural, some of it the accumulated residue of years that would take more than 6 months to address. But the story about the tiredness had quietened. The second arrow had been laid down, provisionally, imperfectly, more often than before. He thought about Oliver's teaching on samadhi, right view, clear seeing, and understood now, in a way he had not quite understood during the retreat itself, why it was placed first. Before any other practice, before any technique or method or approach to changing what was there. First, simply, the seeing of it clearly, without the story, without the evaluation, without the management that transforms the actual experience into something more presentable before it has even been felt. The first step is not to get better. The first step is to see clearly what is there. Because what is there, when you finally allow yourself to see it without the story, is never quite as catastrophic as the story has been suggesting. It is simply what it is, the depletion or the grief, or the loneliness or the exhaustion or the loss, real, present, deserving of acknowledgement and care, and entirely workable. Not immediately resolvable, not easily addressed, not something that disappears in a week of retreat, but workable, capable of being met with honesty and patience, and the same quality of care that a good doctor brings to a complex case, which is to say, the understanding that healing takes the time it takes, that it moves at its own pace, and that the work of showing up for it, again and again, is not secondary to the healing. It is the healing. If you are tired in the way Stephen was tired, if you have been managing something for a long time that needs more than management, if you have been applying to your own suffering the same efficient, problem-solving approach that works everywhere else, and finding that it does not quite reach the place that needs reaching, then this story and the teaching it carries offers you what Oliver offered those 14 physicians in a farmhouse in the countryside. Not a solution, not a technique that will fix what is broken in a set number of sessions, but a permission. Permission to see what is actually there without the story. Permission to feel what is actually there before the evaluation arrives. Permission to be in the precise and private space of your own interior life, exactly as depleted or grieving or lost or uncertain as you actually are, not as a permanent state, but as the honest starting point from which genuine healing can begin. Because healing cannot begin from the managed version. It can only begin from the real one. From the moment you stop telling yourself it is almost fine and allow yourself to know, clearly and without flinching, that it is not yet fine, and that this is not a failure, and that the not yet fine is exactly where the practice begins. The Buddha's first noble truth is not a pessimistic verdict. It is an act of profound respect for the reality of human experience. It says, I see what you are carrying. I am not going to ask you to pretend it is lighter than it is. I am not going to offer you a reframe that makes it more manageable before you have been given permission to acknowledge what it actually is. I am going to begin where you actually are. That is the beginning. And the beginning, this breath, this moment, this permission to be exactly where you are, is enough to start. If you are very tired, rest now. Not the rest of avoidance or distraction. The rest of someone who has been given permission to put the performance down just for this hour and to simply be what they are, which is a human being who has been trying very hard for a very long time and who deserves the same quality of care that they extend so readily to everyone else. May you receive that care. May you begin to give it to yourself. May the story quiet and the primary experience finally land, and the space that opens in the landing be filled with something gentler and more true than what the management has been putting there. You are not failing. You are tired. They are very different things. Rest now. You have done enough. You are enough. This breath, this moment, this is where it begins. Welcome. Before we rest completely, there is one more thing worth holding. Oliver, on the final morning of the retreat, before the group dispersed back to their practices and their hospitals and their families and the ordinary, extraordinary difficulty of their lives, said something that Stephen returned to many times in the months that followed. He said the Buddhist teaching on suffering is often described as if it is primarily about big things, about death, about loss, about the great existential difficulties of being human. And it is about those things. But one of the Buddha's most radical insights was that the same quality of suffering that arises from the great losses also arises from the small, accumulated daily experience of not quite being at home in your own life, of performing a version of yourself that does not fully match what is actually inside, of spending the hours of your days in the service of obligations and expectations and other people's needs, while something essential in you goes unattended. He said the Buddha called this the first noble truth, not because he wanted people to feel hopeless about existence, but because he wanted them to stop pretending, to stop performing well-being at themselves and at each other, to look clearly, without embarrassment, at the gap between the life they are presenting and the life they are actually living, because that gap, however uncomfortable to acknowledge, is the beginning of the map. You cannot navigate from a place you are pretending you are not in. He said, finally, you have spent this week allowing yourselves to be in the actual place. Not the managed version, the actual one. Take that with you. Not as an achievement. The tendency to turn everything into an achievement will assert itself soon enough. But as a practice. The practice of returning each day to what is actually here. The actual tiredness. The actual longing. The actual small joys, which are real and present and available the moment you stop being too busy performing the larger version of your life to notice them. Stephen remembered this on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, about 8 months after the retreat, when he was sitting in his consulting room between appointments. He had 10 minutes, a small miracle of scheduling, and instead of using them for the admin that was always waiting, he sat for a moment with the window in front of him, looking at the sky. It was a very ordinary sky, gray, slightly moving, the particular undramatic gray of a November afternoon in a northern city. And he looked at it, simply, without agenda, without the secondary experience arriving to tell him what it meant or what he should be doing instead. The sky was doing what the sky does, completely indifferent to his schedule, moving in the way clouds move, with the particular unhurried quality of things that do not have anywhere they need to be. He thought, this is what I was missing, not the sky specifically, the ability to be in the actual moment, without the story about the moment, arriving before the moment has had time to be what it is. He thought about his patients. He thought about how many of them came to him carrying exactly what he had been carrying, the gap between the presented life and the actual life, the exhaustion of maintaining the performance, the 3 a.m. quality of quiet desperation that looks perfectly functional from the outside. He thought about how he sat with them in that room and listened, and what the listening actually was, not the clinical processing of information, though it was that too, but the quality of presence, the willingness to be genuinely there with what they were bringing, without rushing to fix it or reframe it or move it along. He thought, I have been offering that quality to my patients for 26 years and withholding it from myself for 11. He resolved, quietly, without drama, to try to change the ratio. Not perfectly, not all at once, but in the small increments that genuine change is actually made of. The 20 minutes in the morning, the 10 minutes between appointments watching an unremarkable sky, the evenings when he told Patricia what was actually in his head rather than the managed version. The conversations he was beginning to have with colleagues about the difficulty of the work, which were conversations they had all been avoiding, and which, once started, turned out to be the conversations most of them had needed for years. The change was slow. It was not linear. There were weeks when the management reasserted itself fully, and the practice disappeared, and the gap between the presented life and the actual life opened again in the old way, familiar and discouraging. He returned. This is what the practice asks. Not that you maintain it perfectly, but that you return to it, again and again, each time from wherever you actually are, without the story about how far you have drifted from where you should be. Samadhi, right view, clear seeing. See where you actually are. Begin from there. That is the entire practice. The Buddha is sometimes depicted in iconography in what is called the earth-touching posture. His right hand reaching down to touch the ground, palm facing inward, fingers resting lightly on the earth. This gesture is understood in the tradition as the moment of his awakening, the moment he called the earth itself as his witness to the reality of what he had understood. But it is also understood as something more immediately practical, as the gesture of a person who has simply, finally, touched down, who has stopped hovering above their own experience and has made actual contact with it, who has arrived, not at some transcendent realm, but here, in this body, on this ground, in this moment exactly as it is. That arrival, that touching down, is what Oliver was pointing toward when he said the healing is in the feeling. What Stephen was practicing in the 10 minutes between appointments with the unremarkable November sky. What this entire hour of listening has been an invitation to. Touch down. Not into the story, into the actual. Not into the managed version, into what is really there. The tiredness, the longing, the grief. The small, persistent joy that is also there, alongside all of it, if you are quiet enough to notice it. The quality of the breath in this moment. The weight of your body against what is supporting it. The sounds of the room you are in, doing what sounds do. Simply being present, without demanding anything, available to be noticed or not. Touch down here. This is not the managed version. This is the actual version. And the actual version, your actual experience, right now, with all of its difficulty and all of its aliveness, is the ground from which everything true begins. You are not failing. You are not broken. You are not too far gone. You are here, breathing, present in the way that matters most, which is simply that you are here at all. Alive in this moment, available to it, willing to feel what it actually contains. That willingness is not small. It is, in fact, the whole practice. It is everything the teachings point toward. The rest is detail. Touch down. Stay. Breathe. You are home. You have always been home. Rest now. There is something the tradition calls the three refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Taking refuge in these three is considered in most Buddhist schools the foundational act of practice. But the meaning of refuge is often misunderstood, particularly by people encountering these teachings for the first time from outside a formal Buddhist context. Taking refuge in the Buddha does not mean worshipping a historical figure or petitioning a divine being for assistance. It means taking refuge in the capacity for awakening, the capacity for clear seeing, for genuine contact with experience, for the ground of wisdom that the Buddha's awakening demonstrated to be available to human beings. You take refuge in that capacity because it is already in you. The Buddha is not a model to be imitated from the outside, but a possibility that exists within your own nature, and that you are, through practice, learning to recognize. Taking refuge in the Dharma, the teachings, does not mean subscribing to a doctrine or accepting a set of beliefs. It means taking refuge in the truth of experience as it actually is, in the precision of the teaching that describes that experience with such accuracy that it can be applied in any life, in any set of circumstances, by anyone willing to look clearly enough. The Dharma is the map. The territory is your own interior life, which the map describes with a fidelity that has made it useful for 25 centuries, and that makes it useful now, in this moment, in whatever room you are sitting in whatever state of depletion or grief or ordinary human difficulty you are currently carrying. Taking refuge in the Sangha, the community, is perhaps the most practically important of the three for people who are tired. It means taking refuge in the knowledge that you are not alone, that the particular quality of suffering you are carrying is not evidence of a unique and private failure, but is shared in some form by every human being who has tried to live with integrity in conditions that make integrity difficult. The Sangha is the knowledge that other people have sat in the same dark room and found their way to the window, and that their having done so makes your doing the same not merely possible, but established. Stephen found his Sangha unexpectedly in the months after the retreat, in the conversations he began to have with colleagues who had been carrying the same things he had been carrying, and who, once the first conversation was started, turned out to be waiting for exactly this. Two of them began sitting together on Wednesday mornings, 20 minutes before the practice opened, in the small office with the window. They said very little during the 20 minutes. They did not debrief or discuss. They simply sat. and the simply sitting together in the same room was its own form of refuge. The confirmation that you are not the only one, that what you are finding difficult is genuinely difficult, and that the practice of being honest about that difficulty is not weakness, but the beginning of everything. You may not have a formal community available to you. You may be practicing in isolation, in the particular solitude of someone who has not yet found the people who are working with the same things. That is all right. The teachings themselves are a community of a kind, centuries of human beings who have sat with what you are sitting with and who have left in these words a form of company. Oliver is in this story. Francis is in this story. The earlier teachers in earlier episodes of this series are in this story. The Buddha himself is in this story, not as a remote historical figure, but as the voice of the deepest teaching. You are already here. You already have everything you need. The ground you are looking for is the ground you are standing on. Touch it now. Let the weight of your body settle into what is beneath you. Feel the solidity of it, the absolute, uncomplicated solidity of a surface that holds you without effort, without condition, without asking anything from you in return. This is the earth. This is the ground. This is where the Buddha touched down on the night of his awakening, calling the earth to witness not to something that had been added to experience, but to something that had always been there, the unshakable ground of awareness itself, present beneath every thought and every feeling and every management and every performance and every 3 a.m. exhaustion. Simply there, simply here, simply available the moment you stop looking for it somewhere else. You are tired, and you are here. Both of those things are true. The tiredness does not prevent the here. The here does not erase the tiredness. They are both present, both real, both deserving of acknowledgement. Acknowledge the tiredness. Let it be as large as it actually is, not larger and not managed smaller, just exactly as large as it is. And then notice, just underneath it, or alongside it, or woven through it, the quality of awareness that is noticing the tiredness. The part of you that is here for all of this. Present, alive, breathing, witnessing your own experience with a faithfulness that has not wavered for a single moment of your life. Even the moments when you were most convinced that nothing was working and nothing would ever work, and the gap between the life you were managing and the life you were living was too wide to close. That awareness was there through all of it. It is here now. It is the most reliable thing about you. It is the ground. Rest in it. You are not failing. You are finding your way. They feel the same from the inside for a long time, and then they do not. Keep going. Come back to the breath. Come back to here. You are home. There is a teaching in the Zen tradition, not Theravada, where most of what we have been drawing from tonight lives, but the Japanese stream of the same broad river, that says before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. This teaching is sometimes offered as a kind of spiritual joke or as a corrective to the fantasy of enlightenment as a state in which the ordinary demands of life simply fall away, replaced by a permanent condition of serene detachment from the inconveniences of existence. The joke is nothing changes. The wood still needs chopping. The water still needs carrying. The appointments are still there. The paperwork is still there. The body still gets tired, and the mind still wanders, and the 3 a.m. thoughts still arrive on schedule. But something has changed, which is everything, and which cannot be seen from the outside. What has changed is the quality of the one who is chopping and carrying, the relationship to the chopping and the carrying, the degree of presence that the chopper and carrier brings to the wood and the water. Not ecstasy, not detachment, simply contact. The full, honest, unmanaged quality of being actually here for what is actually here. The weight of the axe, the temperature of the water, the specific quality of the Tuesday morning light on the woodpile, The sound of the particular patient in the particular room with the particular story that has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly this form. This is what Stephen was learning to bring to his consulting room, not a transformed self, not a healed self in the sense of a self that no longer experienced the difficulty of the work, but a self that was more present for it, that met it more directly, that was less filtered through the secondary experience, less mediated by the story about whether he was managing adequately, or whether other people managed better, or whether his depletion was disproportionate, or whether he had any right to find this as difficult as he found it. He was chopping wood and carrying water. He had always been chopping wood and carrying water. What was changing, slowly and with many reversals, was the quality of contact he was bringing to it. The willingness to be here for it. Not heroically, not sustainably 24 hours a day, but in the moments when he remembered, and in the returning when he forgot. This is the practice. This is all the practice is. The returning. On a Thursday evening, about a year after the retreat, Stephen and Patricia sat in the kitchen after dinner. The dishes cleared, the evening quiet in the way of evenings that have no particular agenda. Patricia was reading. Stephen was not doing anything, an increasingly available state for him, the simple sitting in a room without the compulsive reaching for the next thing. He looked at her. He looked at the room. He looked at the quality of the light from the lamp in the corner, the specific amber warmth of it falling across the table where they had eaten dinner together for 27 years. He thought, I have been in this room thousands of times and not seen it this clearly in years. He thought this is what was available all along. He did not say this out loud. Some things are better held quietly, at least at first, until the words catch up with the experience. He simply sat with it, the warmth of the lamp, the sound of Patricia turning a page, the particular quality of being in a room with someone who had stayed, who was still here, who had said, I'll be here, and had meant it in the deepest possible sense. He thought about Oliver saying the healing is in the feeling. He felt grateful, not in an effusive or performed way, quietly, specifically, with the precise quality of gratitude that arises when you have been somewhere else for a very long time and have finally come back to find that the thing you most needed was here while you were away. He felt grateful for the room, and for the lamp, and for Patricia reading in the chair, and for the 20 years of the practice still ahead of him, imperfect and ongoing, the only failed version being the one abandoned entirely. He felt underneath all of it and threaded through all of it the quality that Oliver had called right view, clear seeing, the world as it actually was, without the overlay of the story, without the management, without the secondary experience arriving to tell him what it meant before he had had the chance to simply let it be what it was. The room, the lamp, the woman reading, the 27 years. Clear, present, here. This is what the Buddha pointed to. Not something else, not somewhere else, not some other version of this moment in some better set of circumstances. This moment, exactly as it is, without anything added and without anything taken away, seen with the kind of attention that transforms what it touches, not by changing it, but by being fully present for it. That transformation, the one that happens not to the object of attention, but to the quality of the attention itself, is available to everyone, not just to people on retreat, not just to physicians in a farmhouse in the countryside, or to project managers in meditation centers, or to any of the people in any of the stories in this series who have made their way, imperfectly and slowly and with a great deal of backsliding, towards some version of this quality of contact with their own actual lives. It is available to you, right now. In this room, in this breath, in this exact moment of your life as it currently is, which is not perfect, which is probably not the life you would have designed, which contains things you are tired of, and things you are grieving, and things you are not yet ready to feel fully, but which is, in this moment, the only moment available, and which is asking from you only this, your actual presence, not your managed presence, not your performed presence, your actual, honest, imperfect, occasionally exhausted, but genuinely here presence. That is enough. It has always been enough. The mistake, the one the teaching is correcting, the one that produces the particular suffering of people like Stephen and Margaret and Clara and James and David and all of the people in all of the stories, is the belief that what is enough is something other than what is already here, that the sufficient thing is on the other side of a different set of circumstances, a better version of yourself, a life with the right elements finally in place. The sufficient thing is here. It has always been here. It is the quality of awareness that is noticing these words right now, that has been with you through every version of your life, that was present in the difficult years and the good years, and the years when everything felt like management, and the years when something opened briefly and you caught a glimpse of what was actually available. That awareness has never left. It is the most constant thing about you. It is, in the language of the tradition, the Buddha nature, the capacity for clear seeing, for genuine contact, for the quality of presence that makes ordinary things extraordinary, not by making them different, but by being actually here for them as they are. You have it. You have always had it. The practice is not to acquire it. The practice is to stop covering it over with the story and let it do what it naturally does when it is not obstructed, which is to be here, clearly and warmly and without judgment, for whatever is actually present. Whatever is present for you tonight, the tiredness, the grief, the quiet longing for something you cannot quite name, the specific quality of this hour, this room, this breath, let it be present, without management, without the secondary experience arriving to evaluate it or explain it or tell you what it means about you. Simply here, simply this, simply enough. The wood needs chopping. The water needs carrying. The appointments will be there in the morning, and the paperwork will be there, and the people who need things from you will need them with the same consistency and the same urgency they always have. And you will go to them, because that is who you are, and what you have chosen, and what the work requires. But tonight, in this hour, you have been given something different. You have been given the space to touch down, to be the one who is here, not the one who manages being here, to feel what is actually there in the primary experience before the story arrives. Take that with you, not as an achievement, as a practice. Return to it tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Each time from wherever you actually are. Each time without the story about how far you have drifted. Simply back. Simply here. Simply breathing. You are tired, and you are here, and both of those things are true, and neither of them is a problem. Rest now. Tomorrow the wood will need chopping. Tonight, simply rest. You have done enough. You are enough. This breath. This moment. Home.